Welcome back to our show. I am really excited for today's episode because I am actually learning how to share. So, this is our first episode that we have a guest on the show. It's not just
Ooh.
me. I am getting tired of hearing my own voice. So, I am glad to have someone else on here with me. Since we are in summer, Ramiro and I are on a different schedule. So, he is not on the show with me this summer. Since we've been talking about executive functioning, I found me an executive functioning coach. So this is Chris Fugelsang. What's really interesting is we've been chatting a bit since we connected. We just connected out on the interworld. We work with very similar kids and we have very similar approaches and methodologies. We just do different things. So I think I will say that I've had a really great time connecting with Chris and getting to know him. He may have a different opinion, but that's my thought on that. So I'm really excited to introduce him, and he is going to share with us just some strategies and some tips, and maybe even some stories that he has, all about executive functioning and what he does in that world. So, Chris, your turn.
Thanks so much, Steph. Yeah, it's been a pleasure getting to know you as well. I'm happy we crossed paths, and it's awesome to see all the wonderful work you're doing and how we overlap and how we can share our stories and hopefully help more people out, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So just a little bit about me first. Is that all right? Yeah. So
Please.
I I'm an executive function coach, as you mentioned, but my background is in special education. So I started working in schools, in public, international, and private schools um, uh, for about 16 years before I started coaching full time. And I think that's where I kind of honed my skills on executive function and like where I found out about what it was, because I had no idea what it even was when I was an early teacher. And I think, in my early days of teaching, I would get like 5, 6 kids pulled out of a class, and I would have to kind of like help them manage school, and they really were weak in those areas and intellectually, and they were mostly above or average intelligence, sometimes exceptionally above average. um, but what I found out was that it wasn't the content that they struggled with. It was these peripheral things around learning, like planning and organizing and sustained attention and study skills and impulsivity and all these other things that they struggled with. But what I was doing as an early teacher was just putting out fires and like helping them do work and like being a tutor, showing them, how to get their work done so that they can get the grade. But I wasn't really helping them. I didn't feel as though I was helping them. I almost felt like I was doing them a disservice because they were getting they were passing the class, but they weren't necessarily learning the skills, right? And that's kind of what this work is all about, is like learning the fundamental skills behind learning that not every student, especially our students with ADHD who are on the spectrum, who have other learning impairments that affect executive function, it can often get in the way of their growth and their success. So what I found out was, what I started doing was, okay, I got to find something that all of these students have in common, and something that I can help them all with, that's going to benefit them, that's not just helping them do their work. So that's when I learned more about the brain and how the brain functions and how ADHD affects executive functioning. And we kind of in within the frameworks of a school setting, unfortunately schools don't have all the tools and resources and time. I did my best with what I could with those students during that time, and I noticed a lot more long-term improvement and the development of these foundational skills, which I often say are life skills. We're using school as the platform, but these students kind of adopted these skills and were able to apply them in other areas of their life, and as a result were able to see that more long-term growth and success, which is really rewarding as their teacher, but is also really rewarding for them because they were able to find that success in other areas of their life as well. So that's kind of how I sparked this love and passion and interest in this field, and how I got into it, and how we are where we are today.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because we even have a similar origin story, right?
Right.
So we both started as special educators, and it's interesting just how much your story mimics my own, of just realizing that there's something else going on here that nobody else is really addressing, right? And then we both just took it upon ourselves to pursue this path. And it's so interesting, because I I can't imagine myself pursuing an executive functioning path, because I myself struggle so much with executive functioning, as somebody with ADHD. And so it's your path and my path. Both of the things that we do are things that most neurotypical kids just learn by growing up, right? They're things that most people in the world just are able to understand and do just by nature of going through school and going through life. But most kids who are neurodivergent, most people who are neurodivergent, don't learn these things and can't do these things without support from people like us, people in the school system, parents, right? So it's just interesting how much overlap there is between the two of us. But I think that's, that the school system it's such a large entity that it's created for the masses, right? It's created for the norm. And so it's really difficult for a system of that magnitude to be able to support kids who are not the norm, and to have people who know how to support them. Because like, I'm sure that wasn't part of your training at any point, right? Was how to support executive functioning. I think in my master's degree, I had one class on social skills, and it definitely wasn't what I'm teaching now.
Yeah.
So I think it's, in addition to, the system just really not being able to support it to the extent that our kids need, it's also that those of us in the system don't know how to support it either. And a lot of us end up learning on our own, or taking it upon ourselves to figure it out. So I think that's, that's what we've both done. Oh, that was just my ramble about that.
No, and I think it's a great point. I think a lot of school, I mean, executive function has kind of become more of like this like buzzword, right? So a lot of schools like kind of want to implement it, and they want to try to provide these types of supports, but often, like I said before, their time and resources are limited, their staffing is limited, and a lot of this work I know you do in small groups, I do one-on-one. There's a lot of like direct attention
Yeah.
that needs to happen, and teachers, I'm sure they would love that sometimes they mistake this type of I don't even know if I would call them behaviors, but for lack of a better word, sometimes they mistake this for laziness or disruption in the class, when these are just skills that they have not developed, because their brain, and when we talk about executive function, we talk about this front part of our brain, this prefrontal cortex is asynchronously developed. So in many ways they're behind in this part of their brain development, and as a result they struggle, and they need to be explicitly taught these skills, and because it doesn't come naturally to them like it does to most other kids.
Yeah, I had a really great point I was going to make about that, and then it's totally gone. Let me see if I can call it back. I'm going to move on. I will remember it and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
But I do, one of the things that, well, a couple of things that I really wanted Chris to talk about today have to do with time management and routines and structure. And the reason that I chose those things is, first of all, they're not things that I talk about a lot. So even though I've been talking about executive functioning, I haven't talked about those topics very much in the course of that. Also, because those are two things that are really challenging for me. So that's why, I'm not really the best person to talk about them. But those are a couple of things that we identified for Chris to share with us today. And then we also, before we started recording, he and I were having a conversation about discipline. I guess the overlap, the relationship between discipline and passion, and kind of where, each one of those comes into play. So, Chris, do you have a preference as far as which one of those you would like to
Let's
tackle
start
first?
there. With the
Okay.
discipline and passion, I think that's a good place to start. Do you want me to start, or should you?
Let me share
Okay.
my experience from the other day.
Please.
And
Okay.
then, so Chris and I were just having a conversation because our lives are pretty similar in terms of, we are business owners and kind of by default, that kind of thing. So we were talking about business stuff, and we're recording this on a Monday. On Saturday, I had this task that I wanted to do, and it's for the business. And I knew it was huge. I mean, it was just this monstrous task. And there was a lot of executive functioning work involved. There were multiple steps. It was just this huge task. But I could see everything in my mind. I knew what needed to be done. It was just a matter of doing it, getting it done. I knew it was going to take me a large amount of time. One of the challenges with neurodivergent brains is that we think non-preferred tasks will take longer than what they actually do. So I already knew this was a monster, but it was, oh my gosh. Oh, that was something else I was working on. It was Saturday evening when I started working on this task, and I was working on it until 4:00 in the morning. I don't really have a concept of bedtime. My brain doesn't really register that. So most nights I have to just follow the clock and go to bed at what's a reasonable bedtime. But then there's nights like that night where I was just up until 4 in the morning. But I got it done. I got the task done. And even along the way, there was one point where I thought I was done and then realized there was like 25% that I had forgotten about. And by this time it's like 2 in the morning, but I didn't want to leave it for the next day. In my brain, every day is a new day. So if there's a day that I don't finish something, I may or may not finish it the next day. I may or may not remember about it the next day. So it was really important to me to finish this project before I went to bed. And when I finished it, I was, despite it being 4 in the morning, I was like on this high because I was so proud of myself for getting it done. And it was something that was really important to me. So that's the conversation that Chris and I were having, was just kind of how for brains that need more stimulation, like mainly that's people with ADHD, our brains need more stimulation. Working on things that we're really interested in and excited about, I think is absolutely crucial. And sometimes it means finding a way to make mundane tasks interesting and exciting. And even, with some kids, you can turn things into a challenge. I wonder how fast you can do that. Or I wonder if, so I think this doesn't apply to all of our kiddos, but for those of us, especially under the ADHD category, being able to find a way to make routine, routine things more engaging and more interesting. This task itself was not engaging and interesting, but I was really interested in the end result of it. I was really interested in getting it done. Okay, that's my piece about it.
Yeah. Now, it's so interesting that you referenced the preferred versus the non-preferred task, because there's this huge dichotomy and like split in my students when it comes to things they really like and they want to do, and their preferred tasks and their non-preferred tasks, which I'm sure you've mentioned many times on your your podcast before, but the 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 discipline and passion that they can have towards their preferred task makes it easy and enjoyable and fun for them. But when it comes to something that they don't see the point in, or is not, or is difficult for them, or is usually some kind of school subject that they don't like, right? Or don't really feel motivated to complete or anything like that, then it's the kind of polar opposite, and they struggle really even to get started and like on the beginning tasks. So I think a great point is to make a game out of it, make it fun, make it exciting, and or break it down into smaller parts where it's easier for them to kind of comprehend or like how to complete even the smaller tasks. But more, I often say, like, what's the smallest first step you can take in completing this, right? So like we want to build the passion and the excitement and the enjoyment in the topics, and I think the idea is, how do we find what you do like about that topic? Because even things that I'm not that interested in, I can find some things, I can try to find some areas of interest that I do have in that area. So it's not it's an uphill battle for sure. It's something that I struggle with as well. Like if I'm doing something that like is a mundane task, I have to kind of break it down and make it easier for me to kind of see the benefit of it. So I think oftentimes when we have ADHD, we don't like to see, like, and this might get into a lot, I think a lot of our topics are going to overlap today, but we don't see the end goal or the end reward. We just see all these really frustrating tasks in between that. So I always try to amplify the reward and break those more difficult tasks up into really manageable pieces, so that we can have some incentive and motivation to move forward. So
Yeah,
a lot of this is, go for it.
No,
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I really love that, because for me, I would say one of the most rewarding feelings for me is the feeling of completion and accomplishment. So
Right.
that's why I was so excited about getting that project done at 4 a.m. is because I did it. I finished it. I went from beginning to end and I finished it. And so that I was so proud of myself. It was so tedious. I mean, that I wanted to cry, and it was on the computer and it was late at night, and it was just like, ugh. But I was so proud of myself for getting it done. And I will say, in my life, that's probably my biggest motivating factor, is getting things done, the sense of completion and the sense of accomplishment, which for me comes from doing things I didn't think I could do. Those are probably the biggest motivating factors in my life.
Yeah. And I think we need things like that, and we need to keep them in front of us, and sometimes say what they are, because I think young people often, they don't see what the reward is. They're like, oh, what am I, or they either don't understand the time frame that it's going to take to get to that reward, or how much effort is going to have to be put into something. But I think the idea is, can we make that explicit and clear and say, here's the goal, here's the feeling that you're going to get. And I mean, we could, it's not going to be 100% effective for every child, but I think many kids will latch onto that and want to have that feeling of accomplishment. I agree.
Yeah, I want to share a strategy that I use too. I am not a checklist kind of person. That's really big in the ADHD community. People make checkoff lists, and
Right.
people will even joke about adding things to the list just so they can check them off. I am not a checkoff person at all.
Mm-hmm.
But what I do is I segment things. I'm really big into numbers. And so I segment things in my brain. For example, this project I was doing, there were, I think, 32. I had to do the same thing 32 times, basically. But that I can turn that into a game, right? Because I can take like 32. If every time I complete one task, I'm about 3% done.
Oh, wow.
So then I turn it into a math game, right? And the whole time I'm like, okay, 6% done, 9% done, right? I even do that when I'm doing my workouts, because my workouts get really tedious, especially things like swimming laps in the pool. That makes me want to lose my mind.
Mhm.
But I can, and the days when last year when I was training for my really big race, I would have 7 hours on the bike or 3 hours running. Oh my gosh. But I would turn it into a math game, and I would figure out what's 5%, what's 10%, what's 20%. And then as I'm doing my workout, I'm like, okay, I'm 20% done. I'm 24%. And I would just do all these math equations about it. And then you get to the point where once you're 30% done, you might as well just keep going, and once you're 70% done, oh, like this is the easy part now. And once you're 90% done, you're like, oh, right. So, so I always waited for somebody to ask me like, hey, how far are you running? And I would be like, oh, I'm 40% done. But I think it's, being able to break things down. I think, people talk about that a lot, but I think we all have our different ways
Right.
that we can turn that into something that makes sense to us. For me, it's percentages. I just love doing the math and figuring out what percentage of something it is. Not everybody has a math brain, so that's not a good strategy for everybody. But the check off lists, right, where maybe I wrote down, the 32 things I needed to do, and then was able to mark each one. Yeah, I think something that helps us break things down into smaller tasks, but also see the progress, right? To be able to see I'm done 3 out of 10, or I'm 30% done, or, instead of looking at the 32 things that are on the list, what's next? What's
I
next? What's
I help
next?
I help a lot of times. I'll help kids like find jobs or like get their license or like put in the hour, and they have to do like 30 hours of driving before they can take the road test or something like that. And we track that stuff, and we make it really visual and straightforward for them so they can see their progress as they go and fill out each box. Okay, how many hours of driving did you do this week? Okay, you get the satisfaction. Maybe some kids really like the check off list, some don't, but like filling that up and being able to see it's a progress bar, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm there. I'm gonna get my license soon. I can see I have momentum now. The other thing I would say is like the intrinsic value, right? Seeing, like, it's really hard to teach that to somebody. Like, okay, I see the value in this in doing this task, but like I often say, like, I can tell you what I would think you should do over, as many times as I want, but until you can see like why this is a valuable skill and why you want to use it and how it's going to influence you and improve your life in the long run, then that's when kids can start. And I say kids, but I mean young adults as well. That's when they can start taking it, making it their own, and then using it and developing it, tweaking it, so I always say a lot of this stuff is like, I'm here as your coach. I'm here to kind of shine light on, point you in the right direction, give you ideas, but the heavy lifting has to come from the person who wants the change in their life, right? So like a coach is there for the accountability and the guidance and leading you along that path, but the discipline and the passion, like if you can develop that passion and find what you really like, then that it's not going to seem like discipline. It's just going to come easy, and you're going to be able to kind of get yourself to where you need to be.
Yeah. And I think that relates so much to social as well. Just like you said about the coach, I was on another podcast or another show this morning, and he was saying, that's so cool that you do this, for the kids. I'm like, I don't do anything for them. Right. I'm the coach. I'm here to help them see things that they didn't see before. I'm here to, help teach them things they didn't know before, but they have to be willing to do things differently. Right. I mean, the kids are the ones that are putting in all the labor and effort. I'm just sitting around enjoying it. But I mean, really, the kids who are in my program are here because they would like things to be different, right? They would like a different social outcome. And so I can show them how to get there, but they're the ones who have to actually put in the time and the effort to learn new things and do things differently. But they're willing to, because they can see the outcome, right? But they also have to be able to see that outcome every time they're here.
Yeah.
Right? Every time they're here, they have to be able to see that when they say hello to the other kids, they get a positive social consequence. If they, always refuse to play the game everybody else wants to play, they get a negative social consequence. So they have to be able to see that along the way, as opposed to a year from now. Okay, now let's see how this worked.
Yeah. Which kind of brings up another point about like the pain and the negative consequences is a teacher in and of itself, because if you don't want to have that feeling, in my case it's like having teachers chase you down, getting a failing grade, missing late incomplete assignments, having to stay for extra help, all these other things. When you experience that enough, you have to, that's kind of what teaches you that you want to do it another way. And if you want to do it another way badly enough, and you have the supports around you that can show you, okay, this is how to not experience that again in the future, then that's when you see the real change in students. And when you can tell, I think, when a student wants to make the change and they're ready to put the work in. And the resistance is always going to be there. There's going to be that struggle and like that give and take. But then when we get there, the work pays off, if you can, because we don't want to experience that when the stakes are higher later down the road. And school is a perfect platform because the stakes are high enough, but they're not so high where you can't recover from them a lot of times. So I think it's important to have these kind of like controlled failures in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's interesting. It reminded me, there's this story that it's so interesting how we as human beings are wired to move away from pain more so than toward pleasure. So pain and, trying to avoid the unpleasant is actually our biggest motivator, more so than trying to get something pleasurable. And so even if you think about, what are the things in your life that you want? Sometimes that's a hard question to answer, but we can all answer what we don't want, right? We can all answer what we're trying to avoid. And there's a story that a coach I worked with tells, and it's so interesting because you wouldn't think this, but when you hear the story, you're like, huh. So he says, imagine that it's 4 a.m. and your neighbor comes over knocking on your door. And you open the door and your neighbor said, hey, the tire shop around the corner is having a sale, but it's only for the next hour. They have the exact tires that you have on your vehicle. And I've been told that they're actually giving them away for free. So as long as you get there in the next hour, you can get 4 free tires for your vehicle. Okay. How would most people respond to that? Like probably slamming the door, right? Are you kidding me? So now imagine same scenario, 4 o'clock in the morning, knocking on your door, except this time it's the neighbor telling you that there's somebody in your driveway stealing the 4 tires off of your car. Okay. How do you respond to that? So yeah, it's such an interesting way to illustrate that point. But when you think about it, it's so true. We are more likely to do things to avoid an unpleasant outcome than we are to gain a pleasant outcome. But yeah, it's sometimes I absolutely agree with not even just kids, but everybody in life. We all have to experience failure because that shows us what we don't want, right? We don't want that to happen again. And that's when we're willing to do things differently.
Exactly.
And even, back when I was in the school system, I was supporting a kiddo and he had no desire to change his behavior because he was probably 8 or 9. What I noticed about him is that all the other kids really looked up to him and thought he was like kind of a badass. And so why would he change his behavior? right?
Right.
There were no negative social consequences for him.
Exactly.
And, the therapist was at the IEP meeting and I did, that's what I said. He has no negative social consequences.
Mhm.
Like, why would he change his behavior? And so we ended up putting all the interventions on hold and just leaving him alone because,
Yeah.
we have to, if you think about anything in your life that you're working toward or trying to accomplish, it's more likely fueled by avoidance of, I mean, even having a job, right? We are much more fueled by not being poor and broke
Mhm.
than we are by what we actually do in our job. So yeah, I mean, so much of motivation, the kids have to experience the unpleasantries to be motivated to avoid them.
Well, we talked about, how for our students who are intellectually above average or average, and like they can pull last minute work out of their hat and like turn it in and still get a good grade. And that's a reinforcement that's probably, not a bad situation for them. So
Yeah.
there's sometimes we have to kind of like redirect that kind of, you know, um, that ideology, because eventually they might not be able to pull it out of their hat, and it might be a struggle for them, or they might have something, you know, um, more catastrophic happen to them later on when the consequences are greater, right? So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong in some ways, like, many people can need those deadlines and those last minutes to kind of get things done, and like, but is there a better way? Can you do it with less stress and anxiety? Can you, try to kind of, you know start earlier and
I
break
wonder
things
how
down? And
soon you could get that done.
yeah,
Right?
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
like, not
Reverse
not that
the
we want it done in 5 minutes,
right.
but yeah, if the deadline's 10 days from now, I wonder if you can get it done 7 days from now,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. Kind of shifting the mentality, right? A lot of what I talk about too is just like, I have these little slogans that I often kind of give my students, but some of them are just like a shift in the mindset. It's not about, you know, it's not something that's like going to change your behavior overnight, but if you could start thinking differently about these things, and that's a perfect example, right? Like, can you get this done? How soon can you get this done? I love that. That's great. I'm going to use that one in the future.
Yeah, I have to say I am the deadline queen. Like, I am amazing at doing things at the last minute, and it's
Mhm.
very reinforcing, right?
Right.
It like, I'm like, "Oh, this works really well for me."
Mhm.
So, I do all kinds of now, because I work for myself, there's not a lot of deadlines and timelines, but I am so good at doing things at the last minute. And even to the point, on Saturday mornings, I do a group bike ride. And so usually I'll wake up a little bit earlier in the morning to get all my stuff ready. Whereas most people I know have everything in the car the night before. And I'm like, "Psh, I do not function that way." This past weekend, I put everything in the car on Friday night.
Mm.
And then I got up on Saturday and freaked out because my bike was missing.
Oh, no.
I thought somebody had taken my bike because it was in my vehicle. Right? And so, like,
Right.
that's how out of character it is for
Mhm.
me to do things ahead of time, is I thought somebody had stolen my bike. Um, but yeah, I definitely have learned. I will say we are recording this 3 weeks before it will actually be published. So high five to me. Um, I will say that when there are other people that will be affected by my choices, I definitely put a lot more thought and effort into doing
Mm.
things sooner. When I think that other people will be affected by me waiting until the last minute or doing things, like, we have a person who edits the podcast. So if it were up to me, I would just record them and then, throw them online. But he has a certain window of time that he needs. And I have to be ready for that.
I can't tell you how many of my students say, like, if it's a group project, I can do it right away. If
Mm.
it's if it's my own homework, I can't do it. I
That's
can't.
it's being accountable to somebody else. Yeah, it's a huge
And
factor.
I think that's why I think that's a big factor as to why coaching works, and why, it's you have somebody that you have to answer to, or you have to like kind of explain why. And it's like I always say, it's never about shame or guilt, and I'm not trying to kind of like, ever make my students feel that way. It's more about like, hey, I wasn't able to do that, and here's why. And every time you have to do that, that's a step closer towards figuring out how to not make that happen the next time. Okay, let's hit the reset button and figure out what are you going to do differently next time. And
Yeah.
if you do that
Yeah.
enough times, and I think maybe we need more instances of that, or the students that I work with need more instances of that than maybe the neurotypical kid, to realize, okay, so I actually kind of embrace when they come to me and say like I wasn't able to complete A, B, and C, because it's like, okay, this is just another step in the right direction. Like let's what are we going to do differently next time? And we keep tweaking and keep improving. And they don't want to say that. Who wants to say that to the person they're working with 5-6 weeks in a row? It's not a good not a good feeling, right? So
Yeah.
um yeah.
Okay, so I also wanted to touch base a bit on routines, which I know, like you said, a lot of what we're talking about is overlapping. The reason that that concept is so important to me is I was just diagnosed with ADHD 2 years ago. And it first occurred to me when I was a behavior specialist and I was asked to do a training on ADHD. And so I started doing research and I was like, wait a minute. But I didn't think it ever applied to me, because one of the big things that's a classic symptom is kids who struggle in school. I did not struggle in school. I was an honor roll student. I have 2 master's degrees. Like, I did not struggle in school. But in hindsight, I have realized that it's because I always knew where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be doing, when things were due. So even in college, every class has a syllabus. And I can remember sitting down, it was before technology, before, our phones and everything, and sitting down with my calendar and writing in my calendar when all my exams were and when projects were due. And my brain is very sequential with first in, first out. And so, like, say it's Monday, what's the next thing I have due? And so I'd look at my calendar. Oh, on Thursday, this project is due. Okay, that's what I need to work on right now. And even when I was teaching, there's so much structure. There's a bell schedule, there's a curriculum, I didn't ever write lesson plans. Oh my gosh. My teacher or my principal just appreciated that I was taking care of the kids that were difficult to take care of. So he never wrote a lesson plan. But there was so much structure around our day, right? Because we had the bell schedule and the curriculum, and everything is so structured. And even when I was a behavior specialist, my work was structured around when people had IEP meetings and when I was supposed to be at certain campuses. So it wasn't until I came full time as self-employed that I was like, oh my gosh, my world has fallen apart. And that's when I really started to struggle. And I went and, sought out a diagnosis. So I have learned that a lot of people with ADHD resist the concept of structure. I absolutely resist the concept of structure. I want to go to bed whenever I want to.
Right.
I'm going to eat lunch at 2:00. I'm going to do whatever I want to. But it's so interesting because I feel like I went through this period where I recognized that a lot of us who are a little more rebellious, we feel like we have more control when we can do whatever we want to. But in reality, we have more control when we can control ourselves enough to follow a system and a schedule. That takes a much greater amount of control on our part to follow a system and a schedule than to just do whatever we want when we want to. And so that's why, the conversation about routines is one I really want to touch on, because it's so important to me personally. And I've just learned, especially being self-employed, And, now as we're talking about this, we're in summer, we've got kids, out of school and all that kind of stuff. And it's really easy to just let the day go by. We are pretty miserable without structure and routines, to be honest. We are pretty miserable without having those things in place for us. We pretend like we don't want them. We think we don't want them. But yeah, we are actually pretty miserable without them. So, all right, that's my soapbox. If you want to say whatever you want to say about that.
Yeah, please. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think, the worst thing for us, my students, especially during the summer, is a lack of a schedule and too much free time, open-ended time. I think it's actually, just like detrimental to their happiness in that during that time. And I mean, even with, I think for most people, even with my own daughter, if she has too much unstructured time, things start happening. She starts being not misbehaving, doing things that she shouldn't be doing. So we need to bring some more structure into her day and into our children's days, right? So one of the number one things I work on with my students is having a plan, or writing things down, getting it out of your head, saying, when are you going to do something? And even if you can't 100% commit, tell me around what time you plan to do it, instead of just saying I don't know when I'm going to do it, or I'll get to it. No, well, let's commit to something. If you don't get it done, we can cross that bridge when you get there. But we have to start building these routines. Okay. So many of my students have really off schedule sleep habits and patterns. So they'll go to bed whenever and wake up super late, and then their day is already kind of upside down. A lot of my students who are in college, they struggle with, because this is one of the first times where you kind of have to, you said you were really good with understanding the syllabus and writing things down and knowing how, when due dates were. Many of my students just react to what's right in front of them, and they don't have any systems or routines for writing these things down. So, our brains are really some people are really good at remembering things. I'm not one of those people, but my students, they think they're really good at remembering dates and times and all these things, and they might be pretty good about it, but it's not really where they should be going with this kind of with their planning. And what they should be using that valuable brain space for is critical thinking and deep thinking, not remembering dates and times for things. So the first 10 or 15 minutes of my sessions is just dumping everything out of our brains and getting it and laying it out visually, so we can see what our days are going to look like. We can see how the week's going to unfold, and we can start to develop a little bit of a plan. Once it's visual, once we can start to see it, then we can kind of have a much better chance of acting on it. And then if we stumble along that way, we can regroup and change things and move things around. But a lot of my students like my planner because I make it really visual, really color coded, and it's really structured in a way that kind of helps them follow a routine, because we all crave a routine and structure. I know, as a teacher myself, by the end of the summer, I was didn't know what to do with myself. I want to get back into my daily routine. And I think our kids are that way too. They want that kind of support, and they want to know what they're doing next, or at least what they have to do next. So
yeah, I know last summer I did an episode about summer schedules for kids. For us, I'm in Texas, we're already halfway through summer. So I was looking at it the other day. It was part of this 38-step project I was working on. I was like, oh, I probably should have reminded people that I have that episode. We're already halfway through summer. But for those of you guys that are just starting summer, I do have an episode where I talk about, number one, the importance of having a schedule in the summer, but also how to create a schedule with your kiddo so that it's not being directed at them, right? They're not being told what the schedule is, how to create a schedule with them. And yeah, it definitely, one of the things that I realized, I had another project I was planning on working on yesterday, but that when I finally got up yesterday, my brain was so done from all the mental energy I had to expend the day before. And I realized as the day went on and I wasn't doing it and wasn't doing, I actually made up this joke where I was talking to my brain and my brain was like, "Hey, Steph, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm just taking a break before I start that project." And then my brain was like, "But you said that 4 hours ago, right?" But I also recognized that the day before was so consuming that I needed to not have anything planned the next day. And I thought, wow, that's how I need my life to be. I like today, I was on a podcast interview this morning. I went to the gym. I had a meeting with somebody that's helping me with something. Now we're having this podcast interview. That means tomorrow I need to have very little on my schedule. But then Wednesday, I've got a busy day all over again. So I'm learning, even, as old as I am, I'm still learning what I need and how my system works. So we definitely need downtime. We need that creative time. We need that alone time. But it needs to be balanced with the structure and the routines and, that kind of thing. And so being able to create a summer schedule with your child helps everybody get a little bit of what they need and what they want. So yeah, just a shout out to that episode from a year ago. Okay. Chris, is there anything else that you would like to talk about that we have not already touched on?
No, you're just reminding of me of my own strategy, which I have on full display right here behind me, which is, I need things big, I need things visual, and I need environmental cues to kind of keep me on track. And I have a little bit of a gym routine going here, and if I miss a day, I'm gonna know because it's big and bold and in my face and in my walking space to my workstation. So I need that for myself to kind of make it more real and to make it stick. Hopefully, like in a few weeks, I won't need it anymore. But I in the beginning, I needed it to kind of keep me going and get me started. I think routines are always hardest to get started. Once we have them up and running, then and they become habit, that's what we want, right? And then we can kind of put it on autopilot a little bit, and that's the place we want to be at, which is, it's hard to start and stop. I know if I fall off, then it's to get back on. It's a lot harder again to restart. So I know I have to ride on my routines and rely on my habits to kind of keep me going, or else I'm gonna, fall off of them and then have to start over. And it's always hard to start from the beginning again.
Yeah, I have a couple things I want to say about that too. I am so impressed with myself that I am on a 162-day streak on Duolingo.
Oh,
Okay.
nice.
162 days. That's the only day. That's from when I just started in January. The only day that I missed was when I was flying to New Zealand in March, and you lose a day, right?
Oh, wow.
But with the paid version of Duolingo, they're like, you can just pay some coins for that, right? So it's the only time I've missed a day, which technically I didn't miss it. I was like over the ocean, 162 days of doing the, and I do it twice a day. But that system is super gamified, right? So when we were talking about making things motivational and making things fun and enjoyable, that's part of it. Is it's super gamified. There's a reason I know I'm on a day 162 is because it's all over the app when I 162, right. And you know what I mean? Like you can share it on social media. So I also, when things are an exception instead of a routine, they are much less likely to get done. And when it's a routine, it's just what we do, right? When I get up in the morning, I do Duolingo. It's just what I do. But when things are something we only do once or twice a week or once or twice a month, they, 3 weeks later, you're like, oh, I was supposed to do that thing that I do once or twice a month. Even working with us, Chris, I feel the same way sometimes that, when kids only come once a week, it's like, it's kind of hard to maintain the momentum and the progress when they only come once a week. But we work in the bigger picture of things. but I definitely think even things like hygiene, right? That we still brush our teeth and put on deodorant on the weekends, for example, because the more something is a daily routine, then it just becomes part of what we do. It's
Right.
when something only happens at certain occasions that we resist it. Um, but it's making something a routine, your workout routine, my Duolingo routine. I actually, before this weekend, had got into a pretty good bedtime routine. Now I'm completely off, but but I can start again tonight, right? I can start again now. I tell my kids this all the time. We can always try again. We can
Absolutely.
always try again. So yeah, I think I think we kind of don't want to give kids as much structure and routine sometimes because we feel like they need more freedom, but really they don't. They need more support and organization. I even remember as a kid, when I would get bored, I would start messing with my brother. I mean, like I remember that, I remember as an adult, when I would get bored, I would start messing with my husband when I was married. Like like just messing with him, just poking at him. And because I was bored and my brain needs stimulation, so if you're seeing behavior challenges, during the downtime, it's because your kid's bored.
Yep.
It's because they don't have enough structure and routine, and they're bored and they're just
Exactly.
spinning. So yeah.
Totally
Now it's
agree.
just my cat, so I don't mess. She's too sweet for me to poke at her, but okay. Before we go, Chris, please tell the people where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you, kind of maybe how your program works, anything else that you would like to share.
Sure. Yeah. So I do executive function coaching. Usually it works where it's twice a week, at the least, and where we're working on all of these skills we mentioned, plus much more foundational skills for planning, organizing, and kind of gathering all these peripheral skills to make people better successful at whatever it is they're doing, and empowering them to kind of adopt these skills for life and to be better all around and have more success and find more happiness, hopefully, in the long run, because that's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day, right? More happiness and less pain, I would say. And people can look me up on my website at exceptionalpath.com, or they can email me directly at theexceptionalpath@gmail.com.
And we'll have all that when I put this out on email, social media. We'll have Chris's information, his website, his email, and your services are on Zoom, so
Right.
they're available to anybody that can, where the time zones kind of work out. Okay,
Absolutely.
and
Thank
what's your age range, and then types of students that
Yeah,
you work with?
I predominantly work with students who have ADHD or other executive function related issues. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an ADHD diagnosis, but it could be someone who's on the spectrum, or it could be some other learning impairment that affects executive function. And I work with a wide range of students, usually from like lower middle school through young adults. So all through high school and college as well. So
Okay, awesome. Chris, thank you so much for being here. My first guest.
thank you so
Yay.
much for having me, Steph. It's been a blast.
All right. So yeah, we'll link up how you guys can get in touch with Chris. And even if it's not a service that you're looking for right now, he's on Facebook. You can follow him on Facebook, all the social media stuff. Sharing the love and spreading the word. So thank you, everybody. We will see you again next week.
Thank you.